Hi everyone, it's Dave and I wanted to welcome you to our lecture on color theory. Color theory is one of the three cornerstones of the formal elements, the other two being line and space, and those will be talked about in other lectures. But for today we're going to be dealing with color theory. We are going to see how artists manipulate us, manipulate the viewer through the use of color. We're going to see how the color wheel is created, but we're also going to see how the color wheel is broken apart into different segments. And we're also going to learn about the different ways that color can be represented within an artwork. So let me go ahead and show you the study guide. Don't freak out. There are a lot of terms on this study guide, more than any other study guide during the first half of the semester. But the definitions of those are pretty easy. So we just need to make sure we're all on the same page with what these terms mean, and then we get to see how artists will put everything together. So let me show you the study guide. All right, so here we've got our study guide for the lecture. We're going to learn about hue. Tints and shades are talked about together. We have both the additive and subtractive process of color. We're going to learn about the 12-step color wheel. That is comprised of primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Once we build the color wheel, artists break it apart into different color schemes, such as an analogous color scheme. There's two of those. There's warm colors and cool colors. Complementary color schemes, triadic color schemes, and then we look at how artists represent color in paintings. It's either going to be local, perceptual, or arbitrary. Now, under the perceptual color, that can only be done through on plein air painting. We also have some standalone terms such as pointillism, value, and that ties in with value contrast, chiaroscuro, and finally tenebrism. So the conventional color wheel is here. This painting is an example of an analogous color scheme, warm. Analogous color scheme, cool. The Night Cafe is complementary colors. The Girl with the Pearl Earring, triadic colors, primary colors. The Lighthouse at Two Lights, that is local color. Grain Stack is perceptual, painted on plein air. The Blue Horses, arbitrary color. Sunday on the island of Le Grand Jatte. This is pointillism, our value scale, how value helps us see with Ansel Adams' photograph that's just black and white. Penitent Magdalene, that's going to be an example specifically of tenebrism. All right, so let's go ahead and start our lecture. All right, we're going to go ahead and start our lecture on color theory. When I give this lecture in person, I do so over a 2-day period. And also, as you saw in the study guide, there's lots of terminology. At any point where you're like, I've had enough for today, just stop the video, come back to it. That's totally cool. But color is important to each and every one of us. It's not just the artist that deals with color. We spend a lot of time thinking about the color of our clothing, or what color we're going to wear for nail polish. What color are we allowed to paint our home if we live in an HOA? Maybe we're allowed to paint our room or closet doors a particular color. And when you think about buying a vehicle, I can tell you that the last time I bought one, the option I spent the most time considering was color. For an artist, it's like 10 times as important, because color is the very first thing we notice when we look at a work of art. We notice it before line, before space, before pattern and texture. Color does miraculous things. It can create the mood of an artwork. And in this case here, this is a real early work by Picasso. At this time, he's not famous. He's homeless. He's the quintessential starving artist. And his paintings of this time period are sad, they're distant, they're cold, and that heavy blue, or heavy use of blue, really brings that home. Color also helps us create space. In the Space and Illusion of Space lecture, we talk about atmospheric perspective. It's created through value contrast. When we have dark color next to very light color, that value contrast brings it closer to us. Whereas when we have color contrast that's very slight between the mountains, the clouds, the sky, that is all going to be pushed back in space because the value contrast is so small. Finally, it can create the emphasis or focal point in a work of art. It can convey ideas through symbolism, and in the Language of Art lecture, we learned about the Arnolfini portrait, and one of the things we learned was that green was the traditional color of the wedding dress in the 1400s in Northern Europe. One of the things you need to be aware of is that where does color come from? This is going to be a test question, and the answer is color comes from light. We find this out in 1666 by Sir Isaac Newton, and he refracts light through a prism. We find that it's literally creating a rainbow of colors for us. Pink Floyd also figures this out, but they do it much later in the 1970s. So the colors that come from white light when we refract it through a prism are these 6 colors, and these are called hues. They are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. You do not have to memorize them this way. I will teach you a totally easier way of remembering them in just a moment. But these are the 6 hues. From these colors, all other colors can be created. One way of creating other colors is by using tints and shades. So when we have a hue, such as red, and we start to mix various amounts of white into the red, we create tints. Tints might be pink, salmon, coral. When we mix black into the red, we create shades. Shades might be maroon, crimson, scarlet. And we've got probably about 10, 11 different colors here on the screen. Our human eye can depict actually 40 colors, 40 value changes in a color, such as red. So our eyes are pretty impressive. This image just shows one hue and then altered with white and black. Another way, and a more common way, of creating other colors from the hues are mixing 2 or more of them together. And there's a couple processes for this. The first one is the additive process. The additive process deals with light, and that is something we normally don't deal with as normal artists. But if you are looking at this on a computer screen, that is how color is created, through the additive process. If we're working in a theater and we need to be concerned about colored spotlights crossing, if we're working in Disney, if we're working in a fancy hotel in Las Vegas that has a light show, that's when we need to be worried about the additive process. But for artists, we use mostly the subtractive process. And with the subtractive process, this specifically deals with paint and pigment. And you can see from the previous slide, and I'll go back to it here, when we're mixing colors together with the additive process, after we mix a couple colors together, we get back to pure white. In the subtractive process, every time we mix colors together, they get darker or at least more dull than the parent colors. And that is because paint acts as a filter. It's absorbing that color, and when you mix 2 colors together, it's absorbing 2 colors. We do have to be careful not to overmix paint because it can get muddy rather quickly. As we see kind of in this painting here by Rembrandt, it's a very dull painting, and this is a very loving image of his son, but the paint is, I would say, overmixed here. We'll talk about color wheels for a little bit, and color wheels have been around since the 1700s. The Munsell wheel is very famous. We're going to be using something similar to this one. This one's not even a wheel. But this is the 12-step conventional color wheel that we utilize very frequently in art. I think it's a wonderful tool for artists to use, and people like us that are just using it on a normal basis. We've got not only the wheel that has the color, it has the name, and I'll tell you about the numbers on the inside here in just a moment. So when you see a 1 next to a color, that states that it is a primary color. If you see a 2 next to a color, that means they are secondary. And finally, 3 means that the color is intermediate or tertiary. Both of those terms are synonymous. So the primary colors are going to be red, yellow, and blue. These are the top of the food chain. No other colors mixed together create these. They are primary colors. So make sure you memorize the primary colors: red, yellow, blue. We can see the very beginnings of our color wheel being formed here. And then we add in the secondary colors. You also have to memorize these. They are violet, green, and orange. And they are created when two primary colors are mixed together. So I don't have you know this for the class, but to create violet, you mix red and blue together. And for green, you mix blue and yellow, which is a really cool thing to do if you've never done it before, because these are two totally different colors, and they come up with green. And then finally, orange is a mixture of red and yellow together. So here is a picture of the secondary colors. Here is how they fit into the color wheel as it begins to form even more. So keep in mind that when we mix like red and blue together, it creates violet. And those are the primary and secondary colors. So for me, I find it really easy just to memorize red, yellow, blue for the primary, and secondary orange, green, and violet. And then we have the intermediate or tertiary colors. These are designated by hyphens. I don't have you memorize them, but they're easily recognizable. They always have the primary color first, the secondary color second. And here they are. And here's how our color wheel then is now formed. 3 primary, 3 secondary, 6 tertiary. We can also do some simple addition here. Red is primary, blue is primary, 1 plus 1. Red and blue mixed together is violet. There's the 2. When we want to make red violet, we mix 1 more part red. 1 plus 2 is 3. That's our red violet. Now, once we create the color wheel, artists are interested in tearing it apart. And we have 3 color schemes we're going to talk about. The first one is an analogous color scheme. We do a line right through the center of the color wheel. One side is warm colors. The other side is cool colors. Now, the idea is that colors next to one another have like tendencies. So you are usually surrounded with friends that have similar ideas that you do, similar interests. For the warm colors, think about reds, think about yellows and such. And a painting like this exudes that warm color. This is a painting I'm not a big fan of. I don't like going camping. I don't like being out in like the woods like this or anything like that. And particularly with this image, it showcases a very warm day. Even the sky that is normally blue is not. It's hazy and kind of yellowish. This is also another great example of atmospheric perspective. You've got a very clear foreground. You've got a lot of going from dark to light, so we have some value contrast. Compared to the distance over here, where the mountains and the sky, you can't even tell where one begins and one ends. Now the cool colors, they're made up of like greens and blues and violets. Think about grass or water. And this painting here has a lot of cool colors added to it. And I'm not as interested in moving away from this painting as I am the previous one. In the previous one, I wanted to get out of the sun. Here, I want to hang out with these people. There's a certain audible quality to it as these individuals are playing jazz music. And it's a very relaxing painting. And again, a lot of that is just because of the color scheme that is used. For complementary colors, this is where we are going to take one warm and one cool color. And I'm not especially happy with the image that's on the screen. So it's kind of showing that there's direct lines across from one another, and that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it is. In the case of green and red, those are complementary colors that are used very, very commonly. But usually complementary is just one warm and one cool color, such as blue and yellow, and they are not opposite on the wheel. So for the night cafe here, this is a image that has complementary colors. It is also a very uneasy image to look at, and complementary colors tend to make a person tense or nervous or uneasy. And it's because of the way our eyes are picking up color. Warm colors move closer, cooler colors move into the distance, and when they're near one another, it creates that weird kind of feeling with our optic nerve, almost like a vibration is happening, and that's why we feel tense and uneasy. In a letter that Vincent writes to his brother, he says, "I've tried to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. The room is blood red and dark yellow with a green billiard table in the middle, 4 lemon yellow lamps with a glow of orange and red. Everywhere there is clash and contrast." So Vincent, when he creates these paintings, and he utilizes a lot of complementary colors throughout his time as an artist, he knows exactly what he's doing when he's using complementary colors. Once again, these are meant to make us feel uneasy, and in this case, even the subject matter of mercenary soldiers, and they're being pushed into our space on the gallery floor by this red background, which is coming right toward us, and their outfits, the green camouflage outfits that they're wearing, aren't strong enough to push back. It looks like they can literally step right out of the painting onto the gallery floor. When we watch horror movies, it is very common for complementary colors to be used. So in the terms of Freddy Krueger's sweater, it is red and green on a purpose. It just adds to the emotive quality of the film. And finally, we have a triadic color scheme. A triadic color scheme is where we utilize 3 colors that are spaced equilaterally around the color wheel. So we have our equilateral triangle on the inside, and quite honestly, the only triadic color scheme that artists really use are the primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. If you flip the triangle over, those are the secondary colors. So they are used rarely, but it's mostly the primary colors, because the primary colors are very harmonious. We see that in Mondrian's composition with red, blue, and yellow. We see it in Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring. We see it in advertising. Again, triadic colors are meant to make us feel comfortable, happy, and we are definitely manipulated when we look at advertising or propaganda, or even our superheroes. And by the way, when you look at the villains, such as the Joker, they're always wearing complementary colors. So let's talk about the three ways that artists represent color in a painting. There is local, perceptual, and arbitrary. I also have some other terms on the screen. Occasionally you'll hear people talking about objective color. That means local. Optical is perceptual, and subjective is arbitrary. But that terminology is not used very much, and quite honestly, I think the terminology is a little confusing when we use those terms. So I'm going to start with local color. And local color is the color we know the object to be. We don't have to verify it. If I asked you what color bananas were, you would say yellow. Fire engines are red, the sky is blue, and grass is green. We don't have to verify it. That's what we know it to be. And throughout most of art history, we are utilizing local color because we're interested in documenting the world around us. And that is how we also create representational art. So representational art and local color go hand in hand. This painting has white clouds, blue skies, green for the grass as well as the shrubbery, and everything looks and appears normal. Okay, so this is local color. Once again, it's used in this painting, and we know that this painting is not real as far as the location goes. It is a romanticized version of the West. Now, perceptual color is the color our eyes perceive an object to be at a particular moment in time. And I know that sounds like really weird and strange. But the idea is that color is derived from light. And people argue that, well, if light changes throughout the day, color must therefore change too. And they're correct. If we were in a classroom setting, I would have you focus on either the wall, a chair, some type of object that has color to it. And then what I would do is I would walk over to the light switches, and I would go from full light and reduce it all the way to having all the lights off. And we can see how the color of that object, such as a chair, totally changes because of the amount of light. So the people who thought of perceptual color are the Impressionists. They are the very first modernist art movement, led by Claude Monet. And he took his easel outside of the studio, planted it right in front of this grain stack, and he painted not necessarily the grain stack, but you have to think about him painting light's effect on it. And you can't do it just once. It has to be done multiple times. And so we have all these different grain stack paintings that were done at different times of day, different atmospheric conditions, different seasons. So this is what perceptual color is. The color of the object at a specific moment in time. And Monet did grain stacks, fronts of cathedrals, houses of parliament. He did many different series of paintings that illustrated this. Now, in order to paint perceptual color, you have to paint in front of the object. And so we call this painting on plein air. Out in the open air is the translation of that. And while today it's pretty common to see artists out and about painting in parks or arboretums or places like that, back in the 1860s, this is a revolutionary idea because everyone painted in a studio, in a controlled environment, and now the environment is not controlled. And that is how we have perceptual color. So once again, on plein air is like this woman here painting outside. Our final way of representing color is using arbitrary color. And this is where I get to have fun as an artist, because here I get to decide what color is best. And maybe it is for an emotive reason. If I want to make something more passionate, I'll use red. If I want to cool something down, I'll use blue. Maybe I'll have green because it works better with the design that I'm trying to create. So the idea with arbitrary color is that there is no set color for an object. It is arbitrary, or that other term, subjective. This is how we're able to get blue horses or gold horses or a tiger that looks like this. That's unreal in terms of the landscape. And this is the type of image that I will use on the exam, where everything looks completely off. We don't have lavender trees or plants. We don't have people that are orange or anything like that. Everything here is just a little weird and off. This is my example of arbitrary color. The problem that we have in real life with arbitrary color is sometimes we don't know when the artist is using it. So in the case of Matisse here, he utilizes this room with the red background, red tablecloth, kind of a blue design. But that is not the true color of the object originally. We know this because this is a very famous pattern that Matisse uses, and there is a swatch of cloth to the right of the painting that illustrates a white cloth with a blue design, and Matisse absolutely loved this textile. He actually grew up in a textile producing town in France, and when he was in Paris one day, he was riding on the bus and he saw this fabric in a thrift store window in a secondhand shop. And he says that he jumped from the bus, went in, and bought this. And he carried it with him the rest of his life. He loved that piece of cloth more than his wife, more than his kids. And if you go to the Matisse Museum today in France, it's there. And it serves as the basis for really a lot of his early paintings in the 1900s. We might use it as a backdrop. In this painting of Matisse's son Pierre, one more foot, and Pierre's not even in the painting. He's kind of centered on the tablecloth, which once again is that cloth that he purchased with in this case, a flower pot of cyclamen on top of the table. We have another background of it here that he uses as almost like a wallpaper feature. But harmony in red, we can see that it is red in this case. It is an arbitrary use of color. And I would also mention that this painting was originally harmony in green. And Matisse didn't like it. He didn't think it looked very great, and so he repainted it harmony in blue. And he sold it to this Russian textile manufacturer. And Matisse still didn't like it, so he asked for the painting back. The guy gave it to him. He repainted it a third time, and this time it's the most common of his works, which is harmony in red. To see this work, you do have to go to Russia. It's in the St. Petersburg Museum, the Hermitage. All right, we're going to go ahead and switch to some individual terms. And the first one I want to talk about is Pointillism. And as you make your way through college, you'll learn a little bit of, tricks and things like that. But anytime you see this particular painting, if you see it on an exam, the answer is Pointillism. This is a very unique painting, Sunday on the Island of Le Grand Jatte by Seurat. It is a painting done unlike any other painting. And so let me go ahead and switch to a slide that explains it a little bit. Pointillism is sometimes called divisionism, but that's pretty rare. You'll only hear that term if you take more of a modern art class. And what happens is the painting is created by placing a series of dots or points of pure color next to one another, instead of mixing the colors. And so when you look at, for instance, green, for me as an artist, I'm going to mix blue and yellow on my palette, and then I'm going to paint whatever object I need to green. But in the painting, of Sunday on the island of Le Grand Jatte, the artist utilizes a point of blue next to a point of yellow, and he says that our eye will mix those colors optically and we will see green. The cool thing about this is that it works. And so this painting is really about an experiment in color theory. And this makes Seurat famous. Unfortunately, Seurat could have been a lot more famous, but he died very young. He died in his early 30s from a respiratory illness. And he otherwise would have been like one of the leaders of the post-impressionists. This is a very experimental time. 1880s is when he creates this painting. That's another drawback, is it took him 2 years, 1884 to 1886, to create that painting, and it should have been done, if you had done it the normal way, in just about 3 months. So the next slide is blank because I cannot play it, but make sure in the Canvas site to go to the further exploration section and watch the movie clip about Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And that basically takes this painting and it zooms into it so you can actually see the dots. It's a big painting, about 7 feet tall, 10 feet wide. And this is in one of the back rooms of the Art Institute of Chicago in their conservation space. This is how it looks on the floor of the museum. And the only artist I know of that is somewhat similar, because no one really does pointillism. I've probably seen 3 pointillist paintings in my life. You're probably only going to see the one by Seurat. Again, once we prove the theory, we don't have to reprove it. Now, more contemporary times in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we have this artist named Chuck Close. And what he would do is he would grid off a small 5-inch by 8-inch photo, and then he would transfer that image via color to a 5-foot by 8-foot canvas. So you'd have these gigantic images of faces, and when we zoom into it, they look pixelated, because that's exactly what he's done. He's done kind of these concentric circles that transfer the value difference from the photograph to the painting. All right, value. Value is a very, very important term. It's one of the most important terms on the study guide. It is a measurement of light and dark. It is through value changes that we're able to see. As a test question, the extremes of value are black and white. And as I had mentioned earlier, we can discern about 40 different value changes to a color. This is our normal value scale or gray scale, white on one end, black on the other. And when we mix white and black together at various amounts, we create infinite shades of gray. But usually 10 is all we need to really see form, such as in a black and white photo. And it's really amazing when you start to think about it. A photo like this from Ansel Adams, you're looking at probably using 6 different values to create rocks and sky and clouds and shadows and trees. So value changes are really quite significant. When we look at values next to one another, a lighter next to a darker value, we say that there is value contrast. Value contrast helps us to see. One way it does, as I had talked about earlier, using the illusion of space, which is atmospheric perspective, but also value contrast can create a focal point as well. So Wanderer above the sea of mist, the foreground, we can see the dark rock outcroppings next to the very white clouds. Our eyes bring that forward, whereas when we look to the distance, it's tough to say whether this is a mountain, a cloud, part of the sky. We just don't know. And then for creating the focal point, when we look at this print here, normally we always look to the center of an artwork. Think about where Christ would be in a Last Supper painting. But in this case, we have value contrast off to the right. We're immediately drawn over in that direction. All right, we just have two more terms. And chiaroscuro is, first of all, it's a made-up word. Chiaroscuro is the Italian words light and dark pushed together. So what this is how we take value to create three-dimensional objects. It is a slow transition from going from a very light value to a very dark value. And what that does is it helps to create that illusion of three-dimensionality. Now, throughout the class, I'm going to reference the Renaissance, and we're going to have a couple days where we actually talk about the Renaissance and such. But this is one of the inventions. And during the 1400s, we learn about linear perspective. We create it. We create atmospheric perspective and foreshortening. Chiaroscuro is one of the things we create during this time period, and it's still taught in art classes today. Let me give you an example here, and I'm actually going to go to a slide further back, because when we look at these, whether they're apples or Asian pears, I'm not quite sure, we have a slow value change, and we start to see shadowing, we start to see three-dimensionality. And the idea is we're taking how our eyes perceive the world, and we are changing that to a drawing such as this, where you have that chiaroscuro effect, making this figure look three-dimensional. This is a chiaroscuro sphere, and you can see in the upper right-hand side, we have that highlight area. That's where the light is shining, and gradually as it moves around the sphere, we get darker and darker and darker into shadowing. We also have our value scale down below. Now, once again, chiaroscuro helps us to develop three-dimensional art, compared to a work like this, which does not have chiaroscuro. It literally goes from white immediately to black. And what does that, how do we perceive this image? As being flat and two-dimensional. Okay, so this does not have chiaroscuro. That's why it's 2D compared to something like this, which does have chiaroscuro, and that is 3D. All right, one more term, tenebrism. Tenebrism is a heightened sense of chiaroscuro. I wrote down that I would define it as dramatic illumination. And during the 1600s, the art of that time period becomes very theatrical. And so if you can imagine a light, a spotlight falling on a darkened stage, that is tenebrism. So it's a drastic shift in value. In the Penitent Magdalene here, and I can tell you one of the tricks of identifying a tenebrist painting is that single candle that is used. So in this case, the artist kind of doubles it in the mirror and helps to showcase on the Penitent Magdalene that she's removed her jewelry, throwing it onto the floor. Usually with tenebrism, when we look at its paintings, it's got a very dark background, very foreboding, and it's just really, they're fun, interesting paintings. In this case, once again, very theatrical. We have Judith hiding herself from this one single flame, while her maidservant down below is shoving a decapitated head into a burlap sack. This is the before image. It tells the story of Judith and Holofernes, where Holofernes is the Assyrian general. He is about to attack Methuselah, which is where Judith lives. So she and her maidservant go over to the enemy camp the night before the attack. They get Holofernes drunk and end up decapitating him. And this is a scene we see a lot in our history, and we also, of course, love to make fun of traditional art forms. The person who invented tenebrism is Caravaggio, and that is probably the last of the notes you need to take. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Caravaggio, but just know that he was the one who invented tenebrism. He was the most famous painter of the 1600s, which in Italy and throughout most of Europe we would call the Age of the Baroque. This is the 100-year time period after the Renaissance has ended. And when we look at his works, there is a specific heightened sense of realism. Everything looks like very authentic, and I'll show you some of those in just a moment. Now, young artists absolutely loved Caravaggio because he was cutting edge, he was trying new techniques, his works were revolutionary, but older artists, they didn't like him very much. In fact, Vincente Carduccio wrote in his book Dialogue on Painting that Caravaggio was an omen of the ruin and demise of painting, while other critics called him the Antichrist of painting. I mean, I would probably put that on my business card. But Caravaggio was not necessarily a good person. He tended to drink a little bit too much. He couldn't hold his liquor, and he was in many bar fights. In fact, a lot of what we know about Caravaggio comes from police reports of the time, and they have all been translated. You can find them online, and they all kind of start off like a joke. It's literally Caravaggio walks into a bar, and before long, he starts making fun of other artists. Beer bottles start being tossed around the room, chairs are broken, and in one bar fight, Caravaggio ends up killing someone. For Caravaggio's sake, he was a very famous person, and he did get the celebrity treatment. So basically, the magistrate told him, you have got to leave Rome, and you can't come back here. So Caravaggio spends a lot of time in the south of Italy during the last 4 years of his life, painting paintings for out-of-the-way churches in lieu of room and board, where he could stay with them, and he would, for instance, paint them an altarpiece. When he first came to Rome, he was a painter of still lifes, and this is a still life. It's a collection of inanimate objects, but this one's not as pretty as many of the others. You can see that a lot of the fruit has blemishes on it. The grapevines are all withered. There's a leaf spot and fungus diseases on the pear and also on the peach. It is exactly how he sees the world. And so he's not trying to beautify it or anything like that. This is realism. In the case of Bacchus, he literally, for his model, took some guy that was out working the fields and dressed him up and posed him. We have the still life at the front of the image, but you can definitely tell that there's a farmer's tan on this gentleman with his face and his hands. And when we even zoom into the glass of wine that he's offering us, we can see the dirt still underneath his fingernails. This is an image of Caravaggio himself in that role as Bacchus, a young version, young Caravaggio. After around the year 1604, he completely becomes a religious painter. That's all that he does, are religious scenes. And they're interesting because they're ambiguous. In the Calling of St. Matthew, we have Christ, which you can barely recognize. He's got a slight beard, very slight halo above his head at the far right. And then he's calling St. Matthew to join him as an apostle. And all we really know about St. Matthew is that he is a tax collector. We're unsure which one of these individuals is actually St. Matthew. It's not clear to us. In the conversion of St. Paul, it just looks like there's a horse riding accident. There's no religious event taking place. And I would also state that this is the second version of this painting. As I had said, Caravaggio is kind of revolutionary, he's cutting edge, and he'll push the boundaries. So the very first version of this altarpiece literally had the horse's rear end a little bit more front and center, which would have been right over the altar, and the church officials were all like, we can't have this. So we've got the horse turned a little bit more away from the altar now. In some cases, paintings were completely denied by the church. It's like, you did this for us, we don't want it. It's like too over the top for us. And Caravaggio had a lot of people on his waiting list for works of art. So it was not a problem selling this on the secondary market. But with the death of the Virgin in this case is a lady who was a lady of the night who was murdered, thrown into a river, and he paints this image from her body in the morgue. So this was declined by the church. It's like, we are not going to be using this painting. Separate Emmaus, which is after the death of Christ. I think it's Luke 17, where Christ is risen, meets the two apostles on the way to Emmaus, but they don't know this until he blesses the food at dinner. We have a beautiful kind of dark halo behind Christ, showing betrayal. We have some wonderful still lifes at the table. We have Christ with very feminine features, very rounded features, long curly hair, clean shaven. Much different than other depictions of this scene. One of my favorites is card sharps, where we're seeing people cheat at cards. And the severed head of Goliath is a later image of Caravaggio. He did have followers, and they were called the Caravaggisti. People like Delatour fall into that category. Orazio Gentileschi, the father of Artemisia. And so that's where I'm going to end the lecture. I know that was a lot of information, so thank you for hanging out with me for this long. I will be back shortly with another lecture for you.